Welcome to Storytime with Quefish, Effortless Intimacy, Chapter 4. I apologize, it's going to look a little bit different because I lost my tablet. So I'm reading off my computer monitor instead. And just in case the video goes kind of bumpy, it's because it's my phone and it's on like a curly Q little gooseneck thing. So Chapter 4, Nap Time. Simple pleasures of conversation and a nap. Crowley and Aziraphale returned to the bookshop that evening, laughing and trying not to laugh respectively. They hadn't stopped anywhere, but Aziraphale offered some biscuits as he made some tea. Crowley came up behind him and put his chin on the angel's shoulder, watching him make tea and declining the offer of a snack. He didn't try to embrace him, instead just swaying back and forth while his chin stayed perched. "Shoo! You'll make me spill." Aziraphale laughed as he turned around, mug in hand, looking up at Crowley. "You know, one would think you forget you're an angel, Angel. Spills and stains don't matter." Crowley smirked at him. "They matter to me," Aziraphale stated primly, arching his eyebrow. "No sense in using miracles for things that could easily be prevented with a little care and attention. Even if they aren't keeping track anymore, it's just good sense." He turned and started walking to the sofa in his office, still tutting about cleanliness and who it was next to, without actually saying it. Crowley sighed, following him to the sofa, taking a seat on what had unspokenly been decided was his side. He watched as the tea was set on the table, wondering if anything had changed in their routine following the napping comment earlier. When Aziraphale turned and graced him with the same smile as he had this morning, he felt lighter and cocked a cheeky grin back. "You know, my dear, we've been here for a while now, and there is still something you haven't done. Would you care to fix that?" Crowley stopped for a moment and tried to think of what Aziraphale would have been asking for. His mind got stuck on looking at his lips, and he realized he hadn't kissed the angel since they'd returned to the bookshop. He brought his yellow eyes back up to meet blue ones and said, "You could have just asked, you know." He slid across, quickly taking Aziraphale's cheek into his hand, tilting his head. Before he had time to do anything more than open his mouth to take a breath, Crowley was kissing him. Despite his flexibility, the angle was terrible on his neck, and he tried to adjust it as he continued to move his lips over Aziraphale's. He pulled back after a few moments and was rewarded with the view of reddened lips, pink cheeks, and slightly dazed but sparkling blue eyes. He hoped that the angel and his corporation never lost the ability to blush. It was charming to see and delightful to cause. He gave a light-hearted grin. "Have I earned my keep now, Angel?" Aziraphale blinked and then chuckled. "I was actually referring to your sunglasses, but your idea was quite enjoyable as well." Crowley's face scrunched up in the manner that a face does when someone is slightly embarrassed at being told something that they should have known already. He pulled his glasses off and carefully placed them on the table. "How shall I ever apologize for such an oversight?" "I'm sure you'll think of something, my dear. You are wildly imaginative, after all." Aziraphale grinned as he took a sip of his tea. They began talking about nothing in particular, until such a time as Crowley decided he was definitely wanting a nap. While neither of them truly needed sleep, Crowley enjoyed it, and just as Aziraphale did, he noted that his physical form always seemed better off when he had rested. However, he had just gotten back from being away from Aziraphale for 2 weeks, and he had just slept for a few days. Aziraphale was actually thinking about napping himself. He was stuck on the offer from earlier in the day, but he wasn't entirely sure he would be comfortable with that yet. He watched as Crowley became slightly irritable and recognized that he needed to switch off, as it were. And wouldn't that be just the thing to try? He excused himself for just a moment. "Crowley, won't be a moment. Just going to refresh my tea and maybe a few biscuits. Sure I can't bring you anything?" Crowley made an odd sort of sound that wanted to be a no, but also wanted to be more polite than that. He watched the angel return with his tea, biscuits, and a book. Was he going to read to him? That would put him to sleep for sure. Not because he didn't like listening to Aziraphale, but the subjects may be dry. What's with the book, Aziraphale? Oh, well, I noticed that you seem to... Well, that is to say, that you are looking like a demon who wants to sleep. Aziraphale was standing in front of Crowley looking at his book, and around the room, and decidedly not at Crowley, other than to flick his eyes up briefly. I was thinking, well, that is, if you wanted to stay, I could stay with you and read while you slept. You could lay on my lap? This last was a bit higher pitched out of nerves, but once said, he looked at Crowley for his reaction. The demon found himself nonplussed again. Being taken off guard appeared to be a habit now, if this day was any indication. He nodded, sitting up, looking at Aziraphale. He took the angel's hands in his and pulled him gently until he was bent just enough that Crowley could put his arms around his neck. Yes, I want that, Angel. Will you kiss me, Crowley? Any and every time. Crowley stretched up and started just above Aziraphale's collar and moved his way slowly along his jaw before giving a small pull, bringing him closer. Aziraphale stood on one foot, placing his other knee to the side of Crowley's, leaning into his kiss. He had a hand around the demon's neck, fingers through the hair on the back of his head, as he kept his balance with his other hand on Crowley's shoulder. Feeling a tongue tickling him, he parted his lips as Crowley indulged, tasting him with a quiet sound that was somewhere between a moan and a sigh. He pulled back after a moment. You know, tea and biscuits always taste better this way. Aziraphale chuckled, replying, Not nearly as filling, though. He moved away and settled himself on the sofa, making sure everything he wanted was in reach. Not that it couldn't be made to be in reach later, but as he said, no point in using a miracle to be lazy. He opened his arms, inviting Crowley to lie down. He wasn't expecting the feeling of joy that spread through him as Crowley placed his head on his lap, clasping his hands over his stomach and looking up at him. He leaned down and kissed Crowley's forehead. Crowley continued to gaze up at the angel. His angel. He felt fingers lightly threading through his hair, and he melted further into the sofa cushions with a drowned-out sound of content. He realized his eyes had closed, and he snapped them open again. He couldn't decide if he wanted to sleep or keep this view. The fingers continued to pet him, occasionally giving a light scratch or a small tug. He was sure that this may be the best feeling he could remember in the last few thousand years, barring each kiss from Aziraphale, that is. Aziraphale basked in the warmth of Crowley's gaze, feeling it from the top of his head to his feet. He gently placed his other hand on Crowley's cheek, barely rubbing his thumb on the bone and soft skin there. After a few moments, Aziraphale took hold of Crowley's hands and lifted them to his lips, gently kissing a knuckle on each before lowering them again. Crowley let out a long breath and couldn't help shifting, nuzzling his face into Aziraphale. The angel smiled softly at the demon and continued moving his fingers through his hair. Rest now, my dear. Crowley closed his eyes and fell asleep, listening to rhythmic breathing, the occasional page turn, and under it all, the steady beat of Aziraphale's heart. It's the end of chapter 4.